Welcome to Bears on Tap, hosted by Kyle Juice Machalski, Quentin Q. Crisco, and the one and only Ron Luce, bringing you all the news, analysis, and opinions on the charter franchise, Chicago Bears.
And welcome back to yet another episode of Bears on Tap. My name is Quentin Crisco. You can find me on Twitter at BuckHisStats. And as always, I'm joined by the one and only Ron Luce at Luce on Tap on Twitter. Ron, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Q. We're here to talk about the back seven and what that's going to look like moving forward. I guess it could be the back six. Well, no, it'd probably still be the back seven, even if it's 5 DB. So I'm just looking forward to talking more ball with you, and we're finally coming to the end of our position group analysis. And it's crazy to think that that also means July is on the doorstep, and that means Bears training camp is also on the doorstep. So I'm doing well, Q. Doing well.
That it is. And a quick update for our viewers, listeners. So next week we'll be doing an episode where we're all these positional episodes are kind of culminating together, right? Where it's like, okay, we're actually setting expectations for the offense, for the defense, for the team on the season next week. Then the next week, we're taking a week off for the 4th of July. But after that, we're going to bring you during training camp, I suppose, or right before training camp, I bet, because training camp's usually late July. We'll do 3 episodes where I'm going to be trying to get guests on, and we're calling it like Know Thy Enemy. So we're talking Vikings, we're talking Lions, and we're talking Packers. 1 team per episode where we're trying to get guests who create content for those teams to come on and give us a scouting report of sorts of what to expect from those teams this year, what their rosters look like, where some weaknesses are, where the strengths are, and then we can kind of assess how that matches up with the Bears' strengths and weaknesses.
100%. I'm actually looking forward to that series. I feel like anytime we've ever had guests on, whether it's during the season or during the off season, it always provides a really good piece of content for the listeners and the viewers. So super duper excited about that one, especially because then there will be a little NFC North shit talk too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Over the course of the episode. So always looking forward to those as well.
Yeah. I got to admit, I am hesitant to get a Packers content creator on here. Like that's the one that makes me pause. I'm like, I don't know about that, man. But we're going to do it. I'm sure they'll be very cordial, very professional, very kind.
Oh, totally.
And only make a few jokes. But anyways, today we are getting into linebackers and defensive backs. Initially, we had this scheduled out as linebackers and safeties, and then we're going to do a whole episode on corners, but it felt like that was trying to put too much on just talking corners, so we ended up blending all 3 together. But starting off with the linebackers, in the last few weeks specifically, I have watched like 6 games of the Bears defense, all 22, all from the back half of the season, and man, these dudes were flying in the second half of the year. Like, I don't think they were in the first half of the year. I think they were still figuring out each other, learning their checks, their spots, their landmarks and their checks. It's kind of, I felt like they were thinking at times in the first half of the season, but then in the second half, I mean, as Montez Sweat obviously helped, but I feel like their familiarity in the defense and the scheme changes that they brought in with Eberflus doing a lot more cover 3, cover 1, cover 3 blitzes, really kind of helped them get in a groove. And man, TJ Edwards flat out might be the best player on this defense. I truly feel that way after watching the 6 games that I watched. Like, that dude is everywhere all the time. You can honestly, I feel like you can tell he grew up watching Brian Urlacher by the way he plays, because there's shades of it in there. But Ron, what do you think of the linebacker room?
I think you nailed it, Q. I think that's something that maybe people kind of forgot about a little bit early on in the season. It's outside of Jack Sanborn, this entire unit was brand new to this defense. Edwards and Edmunds were both big additions during the offseason. They had to mesh with, the entire defense as a whole. Not having a pass rush early on in the season certainly hurts as well. It puts a lot more pressure on those guys in coverage situations. And I'm sure that's a huge part of why some of their coverage numbers maybe don't look super great. But overall, I agree with you, man. I think Tremaine Edmunds was the type of guy where when he was on the field, you appreciated the skill set he brought, especially as that kind of deep middle guy in the defense, the old Brian Urlacher role in this defense. You saw it, especially right. There was a pick six involved in Cleveland for him. They were humming, they were flying around. But I agree with you. My favorite player probably to watch on this defense is TJ Edwards, and just because he plays a lot. You mentioned Urlacher. I think in the same breath, he plays a lot like Briggs too. Just kind of that downhill nature. He's not asked to do as much in the coverage. He's more of a short zone to flat kind of guy versus that deep middle guy. But at the end of the day, man, he was making plays, and he earned every bit of that contract. I think he outplayed that contract, if we're being brutally honest. And there's a reason he also led the team in total tackles. So gotta enjoy seeing number 53 flying around the field in the middle of that defense.
Yeah, and with Edmunds, you look at his numbers here, his coverage numbers don't look very good, but I truly felt like they were better than that. And I think part of it truly is he's just so tall and so long. He covers stuff up inherently.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe PFF grades coverage. They only grade coverage reps where the player was targeted. I could be incorrect on that, but that's what that's what I think I've heard in the past, which could explain that more, because I think a lot of his value is the targets that he covers up. Mm-hmm. And just the space that he can eat in coverage because of that length and that height, and how disruptive he is to the quarterback's vision by the ground that he covers. And that's not to say I don't think Edmunds is some out of this world linebacker, but I think his coverage grade is a heck of a lot better than the number that they have here, because that's what he's on the field for. He's not aggressively fighting through blockers the way that a guy like Edwards or Sanborn does as a run defender.
Mm-hmm.
He's out there for the coverage abilities, and I think he did a sufficient job of it last year. But similar to what I was saying at the start of the linebackers, I felt like he got a lot better as the season went on and started to feel the instincts more, the responsibilities of his role in the defense, and not thinking it, just doing it.
Yeah, and I think in year two, you're going to see a lot more of that right out the gate because of the familiarity now. We've talked about it on past shows, actually, I think just on our last show, right, with the defensive line. This defense as an entire unit will largely look the same coming into next season outside of Kevin Byard, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit at safety over Eddie Jackson. Otherwise, it's pretty much the exact same unit from that back half of the season that we're referencing here, and how good of a unit it was. So I think Edmunds is going to settle in more, but you put it perfectly, Q. He might not be the most technically sound pass defender by any stretch of imagination, but just because of the freak athlete he is at his size, he's absolutely going to cover things up that, maybe you might sit there on film and go, well, he was supposed to cover this area and he kind of covered this area, but letting those instincts take over and just letting that freak athletic nature come out for a guy like Tremaine Edmunds is what brings the value for him being on the field.
Yeah, and I think he feeds a little off of Edwards' physicality. I felt like there were points where it was like Edwards would start popping people, and you'd see Edmunds pop people, and it was kind of like I almost wonder if Edwards is kind of the rally guy for this defense of like, okay, he brings the energy, so we got to bring the energy. Him and like maybe a DeMarcus Walker, like those two, I feel like are always bringing the energy and always kind of leading the charge.
Well, wasn't Edwards the guy wearing the green sticker last year and getting the calls in his helmet?
I think so.
So I agree with you. I think he absolutely is that guy just by nature, right? Because in theory, this obviously isn't always the case, but in theory, your lead middle linebacker is usually the guy calling out the defense. He's usually the one getting the call. That's what Urlacher was for all those years for the Bears. That's what guys like Roquan Smith were when their time here. That's what some of those other guys were, like Danny Trevathan was very much that way. And all those guys were kind of the rah-rah rally guys. I think that's a big reason why you see TJ Edwards in that role in this defense, even though he's not necessarily your traditional Mike linebacker in the scheme.
Yeah, and there were, I just got to say on tape, that there were multiple plays where Edwards gets a hand on a pass and it gets tipped up and turns into an interception, or he pops a guy, the ball comes out, and Edmunds is right there to snatch it up. And it's just like, man, he was just a heck of a football player for them last year. I hope it continues because it was just a lot of fun to watch. And one of the probably more understated aspects of his play that I've had people bring up to me before and made me notice it was how impressive he is blitzing from depth. And it's a weird thing to be impressed by, right? It's like a guy's blitzing or he's not blitzing. Like, but where
I think it's I think it's largely if you appreciate the really nitty gritty of football, that's something you can appreciate. But I think the casual fan, sometimes that just goes unnoticed.
Right.
But I didn't mean to cut you off. Please continue.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, like, a lot of times you're sitting there going, when you watch a linebacker blitzing, it's like, just mug them up on the A gap, right? Like, just be right up on the line so they can get right into the blitz. But then there's some guys who just have, and Danny Trevathan was good at this too, but just have a really natural feel for the timing of it and how to play the blocking scheme just right to get a free run. And that's something that TJ Edwards does from depth really nicely. That it's not a given that you're good at that. Like a lot of linebackers, you just want up on the line and saying, okay, you're going, and we're playing a numbers game with the pass protection, right? We're just saying, we're bringing 6, you got 5, let's go. But with Edwards, you start to get more of the simulated pressure aspects too, where they're dropping a defensive end into coverage, or even a D tackle. Sometimes there's a clip of Andrew Billings dropping into coverage. That's pure gold. But where you just have the D tackle popping backwards, and Edwards isn't the evident blitzer because he wasn't mugged up. He wasn't there. The protection knew that he might come, but he didn't declare himself either. And then it's like, okay, there's a big hole for him to run through now, and he just flies through it. He has that first step explosion, which I don't know, I guess didn't show in his combine or something, but he's got it on the grass.
I think that there's so many things in everything that you just said, Q, that I kind of want to unpack just a little bit. First, that quick step. Some of that's just game speed, right? Sometimes you can't just simulate that in combine without pads on, without just your instincts taking over. Sometimes that's just an innate part of being on the field. And I agree. I think Edwards does that better than most linebackers in the league. But I think the reason why that's such a unique skill set to have as a linebacker, because most people think, okay, linebackers are instinctual players, as are most defensive players. Like they have a responsibility, and that's their level of thinking that they need to do. But there are very few guys in the league that can take it to the next step. And that next step is largely understanding the offense, right? And in Edwards' case, right, as an former offensive lineman, it's just understanding where the slide is going. Once you see where the slide's going and understand what the lineman's kind of vision and what they're thinking, that's when you can time up those blitzes from depth and get those free runs. Because in most cases, right, depending on where the play is going, whatever, there's usually what we call a lock side and a slide side. And it varies, right? It can start at the right guard and maybe just one player's locked, or it might start at the center and 2 guys are locked. It all just depends on the defensive scheme. But let's say you have Edwards here to your weak side and you got a 1 and you got a 3. And he's going to come from depth. Well, if he's able to tell and say, oh, I can see where they're going, the left tackle is going to be locked. And this is split second thinking that he's got to do, because it's after the play. He probably doesn't know the calls. Maybe over the course of a game, you start to hear the line call things out. And you can kind of pick up on some of that. But he's like, ooh, okay, I see the left tackle locked up here on the end. And I see that left guard flying hard to give help on the 1, because the center has got to push to him and look to that 3 technique, especially once late in the season when Sweat and Dexter were working that 3 and end combo on that other side, and you want that extra guy to watch for the stunt. That's when TJ Edwards lets that instinct and that ability to read the offensive line kick in. And as soon as that left guard takes his eyeballs off of Edwards, that's when he times it up. And then by the time he can try to get back to him, it's too late. He's got that free rush at the quarterback.
Yeah. And so that's even, I don't know why this just made me think of this, but so I was talking about Edmunds just being, just big and eating space. And a lot of times when you see a defensive end or a defensive tackle dropping, you'll see all the groans and the comments of like, just have him do his job. And it's like, sometimes it's just simple as, if we do this, we're going to be really vulnerable right here. So we just need a guy standing right there so it's closed. And like, sometimes as simple as that, it might not always work that well. It's a chess match at the end of the day.
Sure.
The offense has a plan. The defense has a plan. Someone's going to win. Someone's going to lose. But like, that not having that guy drop can make the loss a lot worse than just giving up a first down,
And sometimes some of it is just as simple as it makes the quarterback have to think about something else for half a second.
Yeah.
Because if I'm a quarterback and I'm dropping back and let's say I'm looking to Billings' side of the field as my first read, if I see 97, 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, that's going to distract me for at least a half a second of like, why is the tackle dropping?
How can you look away?
Right. Right. All of a sudden it's like 1, 2, what the hell? And then by that time, maybe you do have that free rush coming from the other side, and who knows who disrupts it. Like, I agree with you. I think that's something that people don't understand. Like you said, it's a chess match. It's a plan. It's you're taking, especially as a defensive coordinator, right? This is very different than an offense. And offense, I mean, it's the same way. It's a calculated risk. And you're saying, hey, we like, and don't get me wrong, there's checks where like, if they don't like what they're seeing, they can absolutely check out of it. But if they like what they're seeing and they're like, shit, man, if we got a chance here to just drop Billings for a second, like you said, just take up space. Maybe they have a matchup they really like on the other side with a blitzing linebacker, and maybe that's how you generate additional pressure. It's not as simple as just rush 4 and get there every time. Not every defense is the 85 Bears where you can just rush your front and you're going to get to the quarterback more often than not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's actually quite the opposite of the 85 defense. It's something that I've thought about a lot as I'm watching through this. It's like, you look at the Eberflus defenses in Indy, and they had Buckner, and they had Grover Stewart, who's probably a really underrated nose tackle in this league. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, it was a pretty mediocre group as a whole, which, if you really want to put it this way, you could be like Montez Sweat, that's your DeForest Buckner. And then you have and then you hope Jervon Dexter can be a Grover Stewart. Maybe Andrew Billings is your Grover Stewart if you want to go traditional nose. But outside of that, it's kind of ragtag. But where Eberflus's defense, where I feel like they really earn their money, is the back 7. Yes. That's where they're saying, we are not going to give up. We're going to hold you to 1 yard less on every play than everybody else. And then you need to run 3 more plays to get in the end zone. And one of those 3 plays is where we're going to capitalize on you. And that's really the goal of this defense. So how do you do that, right? How do you, as a whole throughout a drive, average 1 to 2 yards less than what they're expecting to get? By flying to the football, by flying around, by gang tackling, by being aggressive to the football. And that's what these guys do. Like, this linebacking core covers up. I felt like watching it covers up a lot in this defense because they are consistently holding teams to no yards after the catch, or to, break up a pass here that they probably shouldn't have, but they were just, they were flying. They were there a step early. And like, that's where this defense, its teeth, the more you watch it, the more you realize how important these linebackers are to what Eberflus wants to do. And it really just becomes very clear that like why they invested this type of money in the linebacker position, because they need guys who maybe it's not even splash plays as much as just they need guys to be making that difference in the yards per play.
It's not the flash play, it's the effort play, right? Like a lot of times that little difference in a play, it just simply comes down to effort. And you see that in the guys they targeted, right? Like they let Roquan Smith walk because Roquan Smith is your more traditional inside linebacker in a 3-4. That's the downhill thumper and can cover just a little bit in kind of the short portion of the field. Where both of these guys, Edwards and Edmunds, are both guys that have coverage skills and have displayed that over the course of their career, but they're also just freak athletes that just go. That's all they do is just effort. And agree with you. I mean, look back to when the days of the Bears defenses that were running the old school 43 Tampa 2s, What were Urlacher and Briggs and Hillenmeyer and Roach and all those guys? Effort players. And that's why they were good linebackers in the scheme.
And I am going to push back on that with Roquan a little bit because his coverage, I think, is his strongest trait. Since he's not going to be shedding blocks like at all. And that's part of, I think that's more why they moved on from him, because Edmunds might not be good at shedding blocks, but he's got the length to theoretically do it and the length to be a pain in the butt to try to block up like that. He's not going to physically be a physically imposing guy to block, but he's going to stay on his feet and his length is just going to be a pain. And that's, Eberflus loves length at the linebacker spot. And a big part of that too is Edmunds might not be as good in coverage as Roquan, but his arms are just longer and he's just taller and he covers a wider range because of it for where he's standing. Like if you're talking, you want him in the deep middle, his range from where he's from his landmark is just bigger.
Yeah. Well put. 100%.
Now going on to the cornerback room. And again, let's go back to the stealing yards aspect of it. Another way to steal yards, your corners need to be flying downhill against the run.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's how you turn a 0-yard gain into a negative 1-yard gain. You turn a 3-yard gain into a 1-yard gain, maybe. And it doesn't even have to be anything that sexy. Turn an 8-yard gain into a 6-yard gain. Like that's the difference, is the way that these corners fly downhill on the run, and that's also something that you don't find very much in this league, right?
Mm-hmm.
Corners typically don't love flying downhill. It puts their bodies at risk.
Sure.
Of all the positions, corner might be the most where your athletic abilities are your livelihood, because you take the best athlete on the field and a wide receiver and ask them to do it backwards, you have a cornerback. Yeah. Right? Like, I mean, it's you lose something at corner from injury, a lot of times your career's done. And so it's hard to find these guys who are willing to go that heavy on the run, to be that aggressive downhill, or it can be. I shouldn't say it necessarily is hard, but it can be hard to find those guys sometimes. And they've found guys like that, and guys who are just flying to the football right now. Again, it's similar to the linebackers, but a little bit different of an aspect. But down the stretch last year, it was like the light started to click for these guys. And again, it comes down to these landmarks to some degree, of like hitting their landmark and knowing their checks, knowing, okay, is there anyone over here? No. Okay. So then I'm going to drift this way. Is there anyone over there? Okay, no. So I'm drifting backwards and covering the honey hole in the cover too. Like there's things that are just not natural thoughts that happen within NFL defense, especially coverages. Like a lot of these, I'm one of my goals this offseason was to learn coverages better, and I've gotten a lot better with them. But there's just so much to understand. So it's like, the amount of checks that these guys, that the corners specifically have, it's quite a bit that you ask of them, as far as diagnosing pass versus run, being able to get downhill when it's run, but not being fooled by the play action either. And, knowing, okay, where are the route concepts going? Is this guy coming across the field, coming into my area? Or do I need to drop back into, like I said, that honey hole in the cover too? Or am I, deep third of the field and saying, okay, but there's a crosser coming to my third, but I've already trailed this guy over here. Now I need to make up ground back the other way. Like there's just a lot of reading that goes on within any defense. That's not specific to Eberflus's, but it felt like Tyrique Stevenson specifically really hit a stride down the stretch there of saying, okay, I'm confident in what I'm seeing and what I need to be doing when I see it, that I can go attack the football down. We saw the results of that down the stretch, and they were really nice.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, you mentioned, right, the Bears finding these guys that they need to fit the system. Tyrique was a guy they traded up to go get in the draft last year. Kyler Gordon was a guy that they used with their first pick in the draft in Poles' first draft to get in the building. And it just doesn't hurt that you already had a guy like Jaylon Johnson already in the building who showed that he could do that kind of stuff when he was in college at the University of Utah. they have a really good corner room. And I think, too, with each of these guys, Q, you talk about, right, how do you take away that extra yard or two? Don't give a receiver a clean release. And all these guys are long corners. They have that length to be able to jam guys at the line, even if it's just a hand. That hand, especially for some receivers in the league, if you're not A.J. Brown, if you're not one of these big, just center of gravity kind of guys where you're not going to easily get knocked off your route, that little half a second difference can make a difference, especially if it's a timing route. And then that's when this defense takes their opportunity to go after the ball and be ball hawks. And you can see it in the numbers here. 4 interceptions from your 2 lead corners in Stevenson and Johnson apiece last year. A lot of that is because they took those calculated risks when they knew they could disrupt timing with how this team looks. And we mentioned with the linebackers gelling together as a unit in the coverage, especially when you got zones to be responsible for. That's a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see. I'm going to look this up as I'm talking right now because I see for Tyrique Stevenson, 9 touchdowns allowed, which is not good, but it's a rookie. It's a rookie
Sure.
who I think a lot of that came in the first half, maybe first 2/3 of the season, and the last, like, something clearly clicked for him at some point last year where it was like, okay, he's seeing it now. He's seeing the field now. So James Bradbury was the only corner to allow more touchdowns last year with 10, but lower PFF grading coverage. Michael Davis also allowed 9, lower PFF grading coverage. Tyson Campbell allowed 8, lower PFF grading coverage. Same with Cam Sutton, allowed 8, much lower PFF grade. So the grade is telling you, yes, he had some busts, but he also had enough really impressive moments that you can feel good about it. When a guy's grading higher than everyone else around him, it means that there's probably more flashes in there, right? There's more boom plays to justify the busts. And not that I'm hoping that he, turns into a Deron Bland with the Cowboys, where it's like, 9 pick sixes, but was burned for 50-yard touchdowns 10 times. Like, but there's I really do think what we saw from him last year was sustainable growth, not boom bust growth, where it's just going to keep getting wider and wider.
Yeah, and I think we got to give some light to your tweet, earning some love from one of the Bears' defensive backs. You were talking about the play where Tyrique Stevenson made the interception against Cleveland on what would have been a David Njoku touchdown. He was open.
Might have been the best Bears play of the year.
It might have been
incredible.
And hearing Jaquan Brisker's response to that and quote tweeting your post saying, he thought it was over. And then all of a sudden he saw 29 flash out of nowhere. And I think, like you said, right, something clicked for Tyrique late in the season, but you started seeing him probably because he just simply got comfortable in understanding what his responsibility was on any given play. It allowed those instincts to start taking over in those instances, because the whole design of the Tampa 2 system is to take the football away. If you're not taking the football away, it's not going to work.
Right.
So once you get comfortable in understanding this is what I need to do and this is what I should do, then once you get comfortable with doing that and it becomes just natural, kind of habitual, I guess, for lack of a better term, for that player, then you can let those instincts take over. And now you started to see it last year, I think, with guys even like Jaylon Johnson, who I remember the amount of shit he got for not having any interceptions. I think a lot of that was just largely what he was asked to do in the defense. Now where a defense is saying, hey, we want you to be a ball hawk and go get it and take more calculated risks, you're starting to see some of that athleticism and instinct take over in a lot of these guys. And I think Tyrique Stevenson's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing I just noticed, I didn't even think about checking this, but we're talking about the stealing a yard, stealing 2 yards. The average depth of tackle on run plays for this entire cornerback room is at least 0.9 yards better than league average.
That's a big deal.
That speaks to exactly what we were saying of, like, they're stealing a yard here, a yard there. Every time a cornerback made a tackle on a run play, they stole a yard, like based on the average, I should say.
Yeah, but again, and there's going to be instances where I can recall a couple of drives last year where, maybe it's a swing route or it's a pitch to the outside where you would see a Jaylon Johnson or a Tyrique Stevenson or even a Kyler Gordon come flying downhill and make the play in the backfield. And when you're able to steal those 2 and 3 yards, especially on like a second down and maybe 7, where the defense is just, or the offense is just trying to pick up maybe 3-4 yards and work themselves into that third and manageable. When you come downhill and you make a play in favor of your defense and a negative play for the offense, now all of a sudden it's 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, maybe even 3rd and 10. And that makes a huge difference on a lot of drives. And especially, right, we talked a little bit about it as, we're going to talk a little bit about it too, about the crocodile punter, but you talk about flipping field position. That's a huge part of flipping field position for your offense.
Yeah. And I mean, so it's, first of all, Kyler Gordon in there. I think Kyler Gordon, a lot you saw that from. Like, one of the big things in this defense is you don't have the Sam backer out there. And like any defense that's running nickel, which is the whole NFL for most of the time now, that's a part of it. But especially in this defense, they really want their nickel corner to charge downhill against the run hard off the edge and just really be locking that zone up. And that's something Kyler Gordon has really started to excel at. It's something that he's really gotten good at. And similar to the comment about TJ Edwards blitzing from depth, Kyler Gordon is a nightmare from depth. The way he flies off that edge, like, and they did some similar stuff with that. They did some stuff where they have a D tackle dropping to replace where TJ Edwards was, and they have Edwards and Gordon coming on the blitz, and it's like, oh, this is fun. Okay, now we're talking. And then it was like week 18 in Green Bay, they stopped doing that completely. It was like, what are we doing? It was so good, but that's a different conversation. But Kyler Gordon in that nickel spot, that very important nickel spot in this defense, I felt like there's still a lot for him to figure out there. Like that, it's a very demanding role they ask of him. He's playing a lot more man than everybody else. He's without top end speed, I guess you'd say. And a lot of nickel corners probably don't have the top of the top end speed. Otherwise, they'd be playing outside. But his bizarre body flexibility really does. It's a real asset in the nickel where you don't have the sideline as a boundary, right? You don't have that protection of the sideline to use to your advantage. You need to protect left and right equally. And that's something that his body flexibility becomes so valuable in that aspect, because he can make up a step if he's off to the wrong side. It's not speed, right? It's the ability to be off balance and get on balance quickly.
Yeah, it's the freak athleticism in his those draft scores, right? That we talked about ad nauseum throughout the draft process. He's over the last couple of years here, and why Ryan Poles has been targeting players like that, especially at premier positions like corner and receiver and whatnot. When you have that guy, and I was actually listening to an interesting clip. I believe it was Tom Brady on The Herd, and he was talking to about getting the ball to your playmakers and what that looks like. And he said, he was like, look, the receiver has the sideline he has to worry about. Like, if he's running an out route, he's only got 5 or 6 yards maybe to work with before he's out of bounds. Same thing applies for a corner, right? Like, they have less sideline they have to worry because that is a natural boundary. But it was always easier for Tom Brady, as he said, to get the ball to Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, and Rob Gronkowski, because they're in the middle of the field and they have those 12 to 18 yards of cushion from sideline to sideline to work with on any given play. It's the same applies for Kyler Gordon as a nickel corner. He has more responsibility, more ground to cover. Like you said, almost as a hybrid Sam linebacker in today's NFL, where he has to be able to make plays in the run game, but he also has to be able to run with, again, most slot receivers are quick, elusive guys who are good in short space. And in return, Gordon has to be that guy. But when you see him making the backflips and doing Spider-Man jumps, you kind of get a quick understanding of why he's becoming so good at that role. And I think he's just going to continue to get better.
Yeah. And so to bring it back one more time to the stealing yards here and there, that's especially important on the running downs, on the first down, on the second down, because the ultimate goal is for this defense, in my opinion, 3rd and 8. 3rd and 7 plus, really 3rd and 8, because so many route concepts are structured around 7-yard breaks, where the first opportunity for a quarterback to get rid of the ball is at 7 yards. If you force a team into 3rd and 7 plus, it's a lot harder for them to get into the situations that they want to be able to take advantage of, that they have a lot of experience taking advantage of, and running plays for. There aren't many good plays for 3rd and 8, and that's how you get turnovers, right? That's how 100%. If you're saying we can force a drive of 5 series of downs, so was it 50 yards? So 5 series of downs, and if one of those we can force them into 3rd and 8, we like our chances of getting the football.
100%. And it's something that I've always said, especially if I'm ever on the mic for a college game or for any kind of game. What is deemed a quality play for the offense is 4 yards. Because in theory, if you're getting 4 yards of play, you're getting 12 yards a series, and you're converting first downs. The same idea applies, though, because of the playbook. Because exactly what you said, Q. There's a lot of plays for for anything in short. There's a lot of plays for, especially 3rd down. There's a lot of plays for 3rd and intermediate. But as soon as you get to 3rd and long, that playbook shrivels up in terms of what you can call in those situations. And just mathematically, Q, if we're talking about calculated risks like we were a little bit earlier, over the course of 5 or 6 series in a half, let's say, if you're forcing a team into that 3rd and 8, they might run the same play twice. And that's another opportunity for you to get a takeaway, because it's something you've already seen on the field, not something where, they have a Rolodex to dig through on those 3rd and short and 3rd and intermediates. It's only a little couple of sticky notes at 3rd and long that any team has to try and convert on a first down. So, and then when you're stealing those yards on the tackle, because it is breaking at 7 yards, you're getting a lot of 4th and 1s in the event that you can't take the football away.
Especially if it worked last time.
Yeah.
NFL coaches love to spam shit that works.
They'll go right back to it. 100%. If it works, they'll go back to it. And that's where you need if you're a smart football player, which I think this Bears defense has a lot of those guys, especially now in the back 7, that's where those guys come into play with their instincts and just their innate ability to play football. And that's where you get takeaways.
Or you just know that, like, Matt LaFleur is probably going to be sitting there, say that they get him in 3rd and 8, and he's going to be saying, well, we burned this kid last year on 3rd and 8 with this concept. Let's see if he remembers that. Yeah. And he's got to, but that's where it's also in division games, it can be so important. And that's probably how Lovie Smith got such quality out of division matchups, that, like, the defense had burned in their memory what the teams did on those downs and distances, the money downs that were for the defense. The money downs for the offense are different than the money downs for the defense, right? For the 100%. Defense, it's 3rd and long. It's like, that's where you got to capitalize. And I think the Lovie Bears defenses knew what to expect from some of the in-division coordinators. And that's what this defense you're hoping is going to start to do here, of like, okay, we know Matt LaFleur, 3rd and long, this is what he likes to do. Matt LaFleur is going to be a tougher one to crack. But Ben Johnson maybe, or Kevin O'Connell, it's like, we know what they've shown us the last 4 times we faced them in these looks. We've seen it all. It's about getting those reps, though, getting those chances to see it all.
Exactly. And when, like, just again, when you can force teams to completely show their hand, it's just going to favor you, especially as the game wears on, right? We saw, especially late in the season, in some of those games where this Bears defense stood up and really held teams off and gave them a chance to win. And that was because they were taking advantage of those money downs and knowing, hey, we know what we saw the last time out in this situation. Look for that. And if it was there, they took advantage of it when they could.
Yeah. One other thing I'm noticing here, I'm noticing a lot looking at this, but the completion percentage allowed between the safeties and the corners both really wasn't great, but the yards per reception is all above average. So again, it's that what we're going to give, you're going to be able to get catches, but we're going to catch you at some point because we're going to make you run more plays, which, and looking at the linebackers, even, I guess the linebackers didn't meet that same criteria. But the average depth of tackle, even for the linebackers, was mostly better than average. The only one that wasn't was flat at average. But it's an interesting strategy. I'm not sure it's my favorite strategy, if I'm being frank, because I do wonder, it's great against bad quarterbacks. It's great against quarterbacks who are prone to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, or quarterbacks who have a limited bag. Like, I think that's why it works against Jared Goff, right? Because
Sure.
you can put Jared Goff in this box and say, we're going to make you do stuff you don't like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't like to do it for a reason, right? He doesn't have the freaky traits of being able to just say, oh, well, I'm going to do something impossible right now. He physically can't. It was the same with Kirk Cousins. He physically couldn't. But a guy like, I hate to say it, a guy like Jordan Love has some of those freaky traits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a guy like the ultimate is Pat Mahomes. It's like, what happens when you face that with this defense? I'm not sure there's a lot of good answers because the guy just doesn't make those mistakes very much.
And I think that's where you can kind of key in on this defense as it currently stands, and that further escalates the need for an additional pass rusher, especially if you can get another borderline elite, at least very good pass rusher. Because then when you are starting to make even the guys that are freaky, when you start to take away time of them being able to make those decisions, that's when you force them to make mistakes.
It's all about how uncomfortable they are.
Yeah.
Right? How do you make a guy uncomfortable? It's a lot easier to make Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff uncomfortable than it is Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen or
Sure.
Lamar Jackson. Those guys, there's a comfort that they live in.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why they're some of the best in the game. But I'm telling you, I look at this defense and especially these back seven, like they're not far away. If you get that one pass rusher, I think you get to a point where this defense that plays in a lot of bend don't break situations can become more of a bend and never break type team where, hey, they're going to start taking advantage of it and force some of these really good quarterbacks into more mistakes because they're able to get after them faster. They're able to collapse that pocket quicker. And it makes some of that confusion within the coverage scheme of a Tampa 2 with the linebackers and how involved they get and so on and so forth to become more, kind of messy and really kind of allude to some of that trickery that can really, get a quarterback in a bad spot.
Yeah. And then so moving on to the safeties here. So Eddie Jackson out the door, Kevin Byard in, which I'm thinking is an upgrade. The more I've dug into this tape, the more I've noticed just Eddie was a step away from an interception. A lot. It was like, I think that torn Achilles really just sapped something away from his speed. And he was just like, you could almost, I almost feel like I could see it sometimes if him thinking out there, like a year ago, I had that.
Yeah. And I think back to I think back to 2022 and that win against the Niners and that interception he makes in game 1 against Trey Lance. Like that is an interception we did not see at all in 2023 out of Eddie Jackson. And I agree with you. You said it a little bit earlier, right, with the corners and their ability to be freaky fast and freaky athletic is their livelihood. Safeties are largely that way too, especially ball hawking safeties like Eddie Jackson. I agree with you, man. That freaking turf at fucking MetLife needs to go away because it very well could have tarnished a guy's career in Eddie Jackson, who very well could still be playing at the level that he was being paid to play at, if it not for that injury, because it does look like he lost a step. And in this defense and in the NFL, that split second, that inch, that couple of inches makes all the difference in the world, especially for guys like Eddie Jackson who thrive being ball hawks and not so much being that, ground and pound kind of safety where the physicality can play into their favor still.
Eddie Jackson's not the first.
I know.
Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles there.
Yep.
Kyle Fuller tore his ACL there in 2022. It was never the same.
Yep.
Sterling Shepard ACL tear in 22. Mm-hmm. Wan'Dale Robinson ACL tear in 22. Aaron Robinson ACL tear in 22. Burrell Peppers ACL tear in 21. I mean, the list goes. It is long. It is a long, long list.
Yeah.
There is something very real about MetLife's turf, and just don't play on it. Because I think
Agreed.
there was another Bear who got hurt there. I want to say in 2018. Maybe it was Eddie who had a slight injury there in 18, and then it only got worse from there. Or maybe it was. No, they lost another player in that same game where Eddie got hurt. They lost another guy to an injury too. I forget who it was.
Wasn't it Darnell Mooney?
Probably was Mooney.
I thought it was Mooney.
Yeah.
They lost a couple of guys in that game. Like, granted, some of them came back a week or two later and didn't really miss much time, but I distinctly remember that game against the Jets where they had at least 6 guys leave the field at some given point with what was deemed an injury, and only a couple of them were super serious, but that turf needs to get the hell out of football because it's ruining the game largely.
Yeah. And so across from Byard, who I think, like we said, I think is an upgrade, long history as a ball hawk. I think there's still plenty there. Like, some of his stats took a small step back last year, but I think a lot of that was the switch from Tennessee to Philly, going to a Matt Patricia coach defense. Is always from a Mike Vrabel one, from a very well coached defense to a very poorly coached defense. Big difference, and I think that showed in some of his stuff. But I felt like the instincts were all still there. And one of the things with safety is I think instincts can make up a lot for athleticism at safety.
100%.
But I'm not sure it affords you the ability to lose that athleticism in the same way. Or in any kind of way. Like, I think it's still, if you start to lose a step, your instincts aren't getting sharper at this age. Like, from your 3rd year to your 5th year, yeah, sure, the instincts might get sharper. But I think at this point in your career, your instincts aren't getting that much sharper. So your speed needs to kind of maintain. And we'll see if his speed is still there. It seemed like it was in Philly. He's at an age where it is a real question. But I still think it's an upgrade kind of regardless from Eddie. As much as I love Eddie Jackson, I think Byard showed a bit more pep out there with that burst, that speed. And then across from him, you'll have Jaquan Brisker, who, it's interesting. I'm watching all this, and I've talked to my friend Robert Schmitz about it some, and my friend Brandon Robinson about it some, of like, what was the Bears defense last year? And this was before I started digging too much into it. Because like I said, I've been trying to learn coverages a lot better this offseason. You don't do that instantly, right? Or you can't do it all through the coverage glossary by Cam Soren, which has, hundreds of pages about coverages. You need to talk to people about it. So I was asking them, it was like, I don't think they played as much cover 2 last year as we all think, especially in the back half of the season, where it was like, I felt like they were playing some quarters at times on 3rd down. They were playing a lot of cover 1 man because they could, which is an awesome sign. Like, that's, you want to start getting into like Spags and Zimmer defenses. Like, that's what we're talking about. Like the cover 3, cover 1 variations with the blitzes, they were fun, but I think a big part of that is Brisker. I think a big part of it is we don't love his split field safety instincts. We don't love him in a deep half role because it's not quite where you'd want it to be from a cover man aspect, from a ball hawk aspect. But you know what we do love? We love cover 3 buzz, man. We love pulling this guy down to the flat and just letting him be a heat-seeking missile on running backs, because no one gets extra yards against Jaquan Brisker. Like, he comes in and knocks him out. Like, I mean, he is a real asset in that aspect of the game that, like, you see them kind of saying, okay, well, we're not going to force him into being something he's not. We're just going to do stuff that works within this defense and for him, where we're not asking him to do things that he's really not good at, and he's very good at as that buzzsaw.
It's also funny too, because Q, I distinctly remember a conversation between you and I think it was actually just after our last show. We got on this topic because we started talking about the next show and safeties and DBs. And I distinctly remember you and I joking like, oh, we should have just kept the damn mic going, because this is the type of conversation we got into. And I think that's largely why you saw some of the issues last season with Eddie Jackson being the deep center fielder, because he had lost that step. And I think why they went out, because everybody thinks like, oh, well, free agency, the Bears' first move in free agency was DeAndre Swift. Wrong. It was Kevin Byard, but they were able to sign him before the free agency period because he was released by the Eagles late. With that in mind, he was the first guy they went after, and they quickly gave him a 2-year contract, and they said, get in here, and you are our center fielder safety. And I think it could be one of the big reasons, especially after that second Green Bay game at the end of the season last year, where they maybe want to do more of that cover 3, cover 1 concept this season because of the weapon that Jaquan Brisker is in that role. And I think that can make all the world of difference here when you have a guy like Kyler Gordon who could come off the edge on a blitz and get creative because of his athletic ability. Jaquan Brisker is the same type of player that can do the same thing. Hell, he led this team in sacks a couple of years ago, if we all recall that. And you can just let Kevin Byard be that deep center fielder because he has the coverage instincts in order to do so at the free safety position.
Yeah, and I mean, you can – on that Tyrique Stevenson pick that we were talking about, that ball was underthrown. That ball's not picked if it's not underthrown. You know why it was underthrown? Because Jaquan Brisker was flying off the edge into Joe Flacco's face.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way it all works, man. It's a team sport. It all comes together, right? And that's
ain't that the truth?
So you're putting him in a role that he succeeds with, and you know you can start to get some variation in there too of like, is he going down to the flat? Is he doing a what's it called? A hook coverage where it's like, or flat hook where it's like he has the flat to the hook, or is he just covering a hook over the middle of the field? Hook to flat. Or is he just in a curl coverage where he's in middle of the field and you have one of the linebackers going down the hook to flat? Like there's a lot of variation you can get mixed in there of moving pieces around and keeping it fresh. That gets really interesting with cover 3 the more I'm kind of learning about it, of like everything you can put him in between a deep middle to the flat, and there's so much in between, from robber to the buzz roll to the hook to flat. Like there's a lot of different variations you can get in there. But one of the concerns I do have, he got banged up a lot last year, right?
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of Elijah Hicks. 45% of the snaps were Elijah Hicks. And Hicks is a special teams guy. Like his numbers actually aren't terrible here at a half a yard per coverage snap. I think that's more about the role that they were putting him in than anything. Like they were hiding him pretty well, is what I'm reading out of that. And the effort's there. And Hicks, I think he's a guy to have on your team for his special team abilities and the want to and the effort. It's all there. And I think he's capable of doing some stuff. But I don't think you really want him start playing at safety regularly. And
no,
go ahead.
No, and I was just gonna say, I think that's a big reason though why we saw the Jonathan Owens edition, and where that came from. We were on the same page here, Q. We were on the same page the whole way, because he very much is largely a Jaquan Brisker-esque player. And you know, it's not to take away from Brisker and saying, hey, you're going to see less snaps now. It's just, hey, if you do get a little banged up because you play like a heat-seeking fucking missile, now we have a guy that's going to come in and more closely mirror your traits. Like, I think Elijah Hicks more closely mirrors a Kevin Byard than he does a Jaquan Brisker, if you're just talking purely skill set and what he does and things like that. Obviously not apples to apples, but you understand my point. Mm-hmm. Whereas like Owens to Brisker is a lot more similar. Owens might not be the same instinctual player that Brisker is, but he brings a lot of those same aspects to the game where you can still do what you want to do systematically, and you're not losing that much if Brisker can't be on the field for a couple of plays because he takes, gets a stinger in the shoulder or something like that just because of how he plays the game.
Yeah. And it's some of his traits here, they match what the Bears want. His, average safety in the league, their depth of tackle on run plays is 7.3. He's at 5.4. His stops per reception, that's a big one here. And what that means is stops per reception. What's a stop? A stop is it depends, like different sites do different variations of it, but essentially it's you allowed less yards than would be expected on any given play, right? Like on a play where you made a tackle, you made the tackle for less yards than were expected. His stops per reception at 27% was solid, Mm-hmm. Or actually, is that? I might have marked that incorrectly. But either way, it's fine, and the cornerbacks are all up there too, which is interesting. I'm not sure why I marked that correct, but either way, he is making stops. He is making eating up yards or gaining yards for your defense in that sense that we've been talking about this whole time, where the catches might be getting made, but he's tending to make them short of the goal or the expectation, which is how you steal yards again and how you get in 3rd and long and how you force those turnovers. There's a whole science to this. Turnovers just aren't, it's not grit. It's not all grit and want to. There is process behind it that a coach like Eberflus, who, builds everything around getting turnovers, you need to make it scientific at some point, right? Like, and that's what 100%. I think we're seeing them do with this back 7.
Yeah, they have a type. They're back 7. They have a type, and they've largely brought in a lot of those guys over the course of, we'll call it the Eberflus Poles era. I mean, this entire group outside of Jaylon Johnson is effectively completely new over the last 2.5, 3 seasons now. And you're starting to see why, because like you said, there is a science to taking away the football and playing the Eberflus defense the way it was built to be played. And you need to get those guys in the building, and you see it with the 2 additions here in Byard and Owens in that safety room. You have Eddie Jackson out the door. You got to compliment a Jaquan Brisker. You go get a more of a ball hawk because of just physical health, I think, more than anything at this point when it comes to Jackson to Byard. And then you go get that guy that can kind of complement Brisker as a little more of that buzzsaw, come down in the hook to flat defender versus your traditional split safety that we had seen historically, right, with the Bears, where the days of Clinton Dix playing opposite of Eddie Jackson and the Deshaun Gibsons and those type of guys. It's a little more fit to the science, as you say, Q, of what they want to do defensively.
Yeah. And so with that being said, you want to talk a little special teams?
I do, just a little bit. Just a little bit. Well, there's not much to talk about, but we all know King Cairo, and King Cairo is going to be King Cairo. And we all know what the crocodile puncher brings to the table here in Tory Taylor. But Q, I want you to talk about what your discussion was in terms of the kickoff, because I think this is a discussion that has not yet been had and anywhere that I've seen. And it's something I want to be able to put a bookmark in now. So when people do start talking about it in 3.5 months, we can come back and be like, hey, we already thought of this. Mostly you already thought of this. And I think you're absolutely onto something here, because we all know Cairo's going to do well. He earned his money for a reason, right? We all know what Taylor's bringing to the field and why Poles went out and got a punter. And he said, right, how important field position is for this type of defense with Eberflus, right? You can get more aggressive when teams are pinned deep because the playbook gets a lot smaller. And then it also helps a young rookie quarterback. But you've got a hell of a theory, sir, that I need you to air out on these airwaves, because it's intriguing. It's intriguing.
Yeah, and it's not to sit here and say that I think it's I don't know if I'm right. Let me put it that. It's truly a conversation of like, and this is what this new kickoff rule is going to do, right? It's going to spark thoughts and say, well, is there benefit to doing that? Is someone going to find out if there's benefit to doing that? Like, I think that we're in for some experimentation here with stuff because of it, but it was all sparked by the idea of Justin Fields returning kicks, right? And that's where what got the gears in my head kind of going with it, of like, man, I don't know, would I trust Justin Fields returning kicks?
And mind you, they showed that in the Madden 25.
Right, and that's where it all rooted from,
right.
And my whole thought with it was, well, yeah, Justin Fields isn't going to be catching the football like he did in that clip. Cordero Patterson's catching it, and then he's handing off to Fields. Like, that's the way it's going to go. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, no, I think you can trust Justin Fields returning the kick, like catching the kick. And I'm like, what's the downside to that? Like, because the defense can't get past the 50 until the ball is touched, right? That's the rule. So you have, say that you're catching it at the 10, you have a 40-yard cushion there. So if you drop the football, you still have cushion where you can go get it. But does that start messing with the play design or what plan you had for it? Or do you run the risk of, catching it and kicking it out of bounds, or it ending up out of bounds or because you dropped it, or worst case, it grazes your fingers and then flies out the back of the end zone past you? Like that's the worst case scenario you could have, right? But ultimately, you're sitting there saying catching a kick's a lot easier than catching a punt because you don't have the heat on you. You don't like it's the spin on the ball, the way that the kicker can manipulate the football isn't the same off a tee as it is in a punt. So you're more limited in the risk that you have there in it. And it's like, okay, yeah, we can probably teach him to catch the kick return. But then what kind of experimentation are you going to see from kickers in doing weird stuff with the football off the tee? You know, are they going to start, I don't know, putting the football on the tee horizontally and do it? Because there are regulations over, the size of tee you can use and stuff like that. But are you going to start seeing them, maybe they're kicking a squibber at you, right? And saying, okay, deal with this, Justin Fields. Like, let's see if you can pick this football up. But then the thought that dawned on me, and the thing that dawned on you as I was saying it was drop kicks. What about drop kicks? Because you can start to get some wild spin on a football on a drop kick. I don't even like. It's been so long since the NFL's seen regular drop kicks. I can't even tell you how replicable a single drop kick might be to the next. But maybe that works to the advantage of what we're talking about. Even or we're talking about. I mean, I guess hang time doesn't matter in this, right? Because you can't get past the 50 either way until it's touched. But I just think there's a lot of interesting aspects there to play with as far as the flight of the football and how it's going to help your kick unit limit the return versus the design of the play that you're trying to interrupt or however there is. I think there's a lot of consideration there. And how are kickers going to be doing stuff differently? Is Tory Taylor good at drop kicking? And how does it impact who you will have back there to return the kick?
I got a tinfoil hat take for you here, Q, and here's why. We talk about finding advantages in everything, and there's a lot of teams that don't find advantages in special teams. I come from a university in my playing days that harped on special teams. Hell, we used to have full special team sessions before practice for a whole hour, because it was that important. And we would win a lot of games because of our special teams unit and forcing a turnover or a return touchdown or something like that. It would shift the momentum of a game. Bill Belichick in New England always had left-footed punters. Why? Because the spin was different than every other punter in the league. And that's something that returners had to keep in mind, because you see guys struggle with returns on a punt versus a kick. An end-over-end kick is a lot easier to catch than something that has spin. And Pat McAfee talks a lot about the spin of punters and things like that. What if Ryan Poles is out here playing fucking chess with this new rule and everybody else is playing checkers? Because Tory Taylor is Australian. Australian rugby thrives on drop kicks. What if
I did not know that?
They test that theory out and they say, hey, Tory, you've probably played drop kicks in your day, right? Australian football, AFL. It's a real thing. It's a whole Aussie rules football. It's a very different sport. What can you do with a football on a drop kick, and how can we make that to our advantage?
It's interesting, man.
If there's any team in football right now that can experiment with that, it's the teams that have these Australian guys as punters, and there's a couple of them. Mm-hmm. But I bet you somebody is sitting there right now banging their head off of probably a wall that looks just like that one right behind me, or the one that looks like that behind you, going, how do we find an advantage? Because the new kickoff rules are very advantageous to the return team. It's meant to make the return fun again, which I think is great, because the whole booting it out of the end zone bullshit was getting old. But somebody's going to find an advantage, because if you can take advantage of a new style and play in football, and you're the first team to do it, that could make or break multiple games for you when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
So,
especially this year, first year of it, it will win or lose a handful of games.
I'm telling you right now, if Tory Taylor knows how to drop kick, that's going to get played with at some point in training camp.
I'm excited for it, man. I'm excited for that.
He could do some weird shit with the football then, because again, his background, Australian rules. That's why those guys all become punters.
Yeah, I didn't realize the drop kick was so prevalent in Australian rule.
It's prevalent enough.
Yeah, that he knows how to do it. You don't have to go sign Doug Flutie off the street to do your drop.
Hey, man, I'm telling you right now, if he's good at it, like if they look at him and go, hey, can you do this? Like, can you fully, do what we need to do? And I'll tell you right now, here's your thing with the drop kicks. This is from Wikipedia. In modern Australian rules football, the drop punt is the most common method of kicking the ball. For a drop punt, the ball held with its long assets vertical and drop kick before it hits the ground, resulting in the ball spinning backwards, end over end in flight. But what if you drop it a little sideways?
Yeah.
And you get a little bit of a weird bend to it? What if that starts to happen? There's a lot of the tinfoil hat is on you right now for me because, again, somebody's going to mess with it. And I bet you one of the first teams that does it is any guy that has a guy that is familiar with Australian football. It probably is Australian by nature because they played it growing up.
And if you're sitting there, if you're sitting there asking, like, can you drop kick a football that far? Go to YouTube and type in Mac A drop kick. In 2021, the Rams had their kicker do a drop kick on a kickoff, I believe. Or I guess that's from the 50. Okay, so that's from the 50, not the 35. He drop kicks about 45 yards. So, and I believe the new kickoff rule is it's still at the 35 where they kick from.
I think so. Or is it at the 40?
Is it the 40? So either way, that would be landing around the 15 theoretically, but I also don't know if that was a full boot. Like it was He's kicking from the 50 and kicked it to the 5, drop kicked it to the 5. Like he might have had more on there.
And if you're making the returner, they'll have to come up the field to play the ball, and it has a weird spin on it. That's how you could create some of that crazy shit. Because as soon as he touches it, it's all go. And if he has trouble getting to it, maybe you can create a turnover, or maybe you just create great field position for your team because they can't get a good enough return. Yeah.
I mean, is that – oh, this could be bad, actually. Velus Jones can't catch punts.
He can catch kickoffs, though.
Yeah. I mean, that's
why
if Velus Jones starts the season on fire, like if he's just like, oh, I love this new rule, I'm bringing it 30, 40, 50 yards multiple times a game, I'm not kicking to him. I'm drop kicking to him.
Well, the Bears did sign DeAndre Carter, who is a returner. So keep that in mind. I think that I'm telling you, Ryan Poles might be out here playing jet ski, and we just don't even know it yet.
It's interesting, man. It's going to be fun to see how this new rule plays into stuff, because I think there's a lot of aspects that people haven't thought through yet. Of it's like there's the clear changes that it will bring, but this was used in the XFL, right?
The XFL, yeah.
I mean, there might only be 10 guys in the league who can drop kick like this, right? It might not be something you just find on an XFL roster. It's interesting.
I'm telling you, dude. I'm telling you, because you got my brain spinning then when you brought it up before we went live, and I was like, we got to talk about that, because that, again, it just, because it's a new variation in the game. And how often do we see significant rule changes like this? Very, very, very infrequently, right? Somebody's going to try to find a competitive advantage with it. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. It's not if, it's just when. And what better way to do it when you already got the crocodile punter as a weapon in that instance?
It's exciting, man. It's an exciting time to be a punter. I'll tell you that.
Hey, you never know. They might become one of the most important positions in the game all of a sudden. Who knows?
All right, Ron, do you have any final thoughts on this episode before we wrap this thing up?
I'll tell you what, Q. I am excited for this back seven again this year. I think it's a unit that's just going to continue to get better for the Chicago Bears. I hope the front four can continue to be what they were toward the end of the season, and maybe even build and be better than that coming into this upcoming season. If they're able to do that, and obviously this roster is far from done. We know the core pieces of the roster, but there are going to be little additions made throughout training camp when cuts occur and things of that nature. I just hope when that first game rolls around and the Tennessee Titans come to Soldier Field on opening weekend, that we see the best version of what this Bears team can be, and we get to see all these position groups that we've dove in deep with and you've done extensive research on, come to fruition. And I'm just ready for football, Q. I mean, that's really what it is here. I think after the 4th of July and after my Christmas, the NHL free agency period, which is on July 1st, after that comes and goes, my focus for pretty much the next 3 months, outside of having to follow the day-to-day with the Cubbies, is going to be following the team that's just a bigger version of a Cub, because the Chicago Bears are going to be a lot of fun.
Amen to that. I second it all the way. But thank you guys so much for listening to us. If you enjoyed the episode, and if you have the time, please go into Apple or Spotify or whatever it is you listen to and give us a rating, whatever you think we deserve. But it helps us immensely with the algorithm on the podcasting platforms if we are getting ratings. So please make sure you do that. And while you're at it, make sure to go over to ontapsportsnet.com for all your Chicago sports needs. We've got it all covered over there. We have the podcast for all the different Chicago sports teams as well. So make sure you check those out. And Ron, why don't we get out of here the only way we know how?
Bear down, baby.
Bear down.